Gordon was born in Olympia. Days winterbacking still the city's and still sailed south as a new Olympia's the sights along the ever-losing nation with ample. Gordon knew up to beat regions maritime. After it, Washington there's a public church and he saw who worked with an agency, a public official. He's the author for Seattle. Fiona Force of the vessel, but known for sailors, and he is the authors of Hanover books of crime history, including Ship C, SOS, Steamboat, and the most standard, the Maritime of the North. In 97, wrote Ready All, a biography of George Yomak, racing shoulder. While his best as an author, he's a gifted storyteller. He is said not half the solemn, humorless, boring, and he put it. Telling tales of Olympia, run by Newell in own decisive style, written from a 98 inner on-course landing for Thursday County Communication, which was the inner with Curry camera. In this sect, Gordon Newell recounts history of Percival Lending, his own with its long proprietor, G. Percival.
Percival was Sam. When did Sam from New England, was he? Yes, he was a New Englander, as a great early settlers, and he was here about the 1880s and built a saw on the waterway, and then slightly, a little before the war about, he built the original full dock, this location. His son, John C., over when he was a teen kid, and operated it till, well, practically until he left during War II. Now, this labeled him an eccentric. What he was characterized to the water as a kid, and my stop, John Percival's steam office, which he operated off state at the head of the dock, even after he sold the dock off to Puget Sound Freight Lines. He never threw anything away. Years after the passenger steamers stopped running to places like Shelton, Tacoma, Seattle, he had ticket racks with the tickets still ready to go in case they came back. He had lithographs and photographs of all the famous ocean liners from the 1880s on. In fact, when I was about 6, he gave me a very gaudy lithograph of the Scandinavian American Line flagship Frederick VIII, which I still have.
Gordon is able to capture the irony and boosterism of Olympia's waterfront history in the story of the city's exhaustive efforts to create a deep water port.
Gordon, there was a project in Olympia's early history called the Mile Dock. Can you tell us something about that?
Yeah, that was sort of an act of desperation. It was very embarrassing to the town to have every low tide expose this awful expanse of stinking mudflats. And every session of the legislature, of course, there was an argument as to moving the capital. And many of the out-of-town papers referred to poor little Olympia on the Slough of Despond. So from very early on, it was almost a crusade among local boosters to do something. One councilman suggested they take the town jail inmates, give them big rakes, and let them stand in the mud raking during outgoing tides. They got an expert up who suggested a big tugboat, let it churn its propeller, and all this would probably go somewhere else. There was a proposal to build a locks at Priest Point Park to make this, well, kind of like Union. would have cost $100,000, and nobody had that kind of money. In the late 80s, they built what they called the Mile Dock, which extended from the foot of Main Street, which is now Capitol Way, out about to Priest Point Park. Had, I forget the exact count of piling, it was in the thousands, all untreated, of course, and the local marine borers, Toritos, viewed it as a massive banquet for their benefit, and within 10, 15 years it was gnawed so badly that it ended up with a float house anchored out at the end, which was a local pest house. If you were caught with a contagious disease, you were stuck in that float house, and there you stayed till you died or got well.
Dredge was maybe after the Mile Dock?
Yeah, that was the next step. The town hired a dredge to come in along about 1889.
When they were really working to
Clean things up, because there'd be another vote state capital when it became a state in the territory. Dredged in and gnawed away for 3 days and came to the conclusion that they would never live long enough to get the mudflats out of Olympia. They just went away, being drained down Treasury. But then a fellow named Doc Carline, local dentist, who became a prominent businessman and a very powerful legislator, became the civic booster of that era, got him to build the concrete bridge on 4th Street, the wooden ones that kept falling down. And the dredge and fill project was really his baby. And it was mostly financed by local people. Those were the days when you didn't run hat in hand to the federal government for a handout. If you wanted something done, you rolled up your sleeves and did it. The Corps of Engineers picked up some of the cost, but the major cost of making this a harbor was borne by the citizens of Olympia.
And that dredging was about a generation long, wasn't it?
It started in the early 90s and finally was completed in 1911. And the completion of the fill was celebrated by the first airplane flight to and from Olympia. The pilot was advertised as a daring birdman, and an area was roped off for spectators. But the fill was so big you could see it without paying the 50 cents to get in. And most of our citizens were pretty careful of a dollar then in those days. I think he lost money, but it was a thrilling kickoff for the completion of the great Carline fill, which they called it for many years.
The more colorful days of Olympia's waterfront are now gone, but Gordon brings them back in this classic tale of Beachy, one of the city's earliest heroes.
Well, no discussion of the Olympia waterfront would be complete without mention of Cap Beachy. Beachy was, he'd done well in a modern Rambo-type movie. He was not a big man, but he was burly, built like a beer cask. He was bald, but he had a beautiful mustache and beard. And winter and summer, he wore a sleeveless cotton shirt and a pair of blue jeans. And the story was that he'd been master of a prestige ocean liner, and he just plain got fed up with the damn passengers. And he came ashore and alternated his time between longshoring at the Port of Olympia and drinking at the local taverns. And he was not a man to be fooled with. When he was going formal, he had an iron hook on to replace his missing arm. And when he was wearing his hook, nobody fooled with him. And if there was cause to break up the party, they called in the entire police department and the reserves. But generally, he was a very gentlemanly individual, very gallant. In fact, another boyhood experience I remember, I always admired him, and I was walking behind him up 5th. At that time, Little Hollywood was there on the mud flats, shanty town, Depression people. There was one float house where a drunken householder was badly beating his Indian wife. And I can still see Beachy walking over the plank onto the front porch of this rickety old houseboat, grabbing a man who was beating a woman, picking him up. He was fortunately wearing his hook at the time, and just throwing him headfirst into the mud. Tide was out. And the last I saw, he was still kicking head and shoulders in the mud. And then Beachy walked on up the hill about his business.
In the tradition of great storytellers everywhere, Gordon Newell brings history alive for us all. Though the ships, docks, and faces of Olympia may change, we will always have Newell's Tales to remind us of how things used to be. Gordon Newell, Olympia's ancient mariner.
Beach incidentally lost the arm after he got here. They were loading lumber, and a sling of lumber broke loose and came down on his arm and a hatch cover edge. Almost severed it. And according to all the stories, he said, well, I always wanted to be buried at sea and no part of it, and walk over and threw his arm in the bay, and then walked down the gangway to the ambulance. They don't make them like that anymore.